Nathan Hawke had always thought of himself as a practical man. He wasn't given to believing in superstitions, much less the sort of fantasies that make up the stories people whisper about in dark alleys. But when the letter arrived, sealed with an ancient wax stamp, addressed in handwriting that was just a bit too elegant, it was as if reality itself had cracked open, revealing something that didn't quite belong. The envelope had been left at his doorstep in the early hours, before the sun had even thought about rising. No return address. No stamp. Just a simple note, yet it felt heavier than anything he'd received in years. It wasn't the kind of thing you ignored, not when it appeared out of nowhere. The letter was hand-delivered by a man in a suit, and he left before Nathan could even ask a question. Nathan stared at the thick parchment, sensing that the contents of the letter would change everything. His fingers trembled slightly as he tore it open, revealing words that sent an unexpected shiver down his spine. You are the sole heir to the Hawke estate, a mansion that has stood for generations. It awaits your arrival. There was no mention of who sent it, but there was no mistaking what it meant. The mansion was his. The inheritance had come from his parents, who had died tragically in a car accident 6 months earlier. Nathan had never known about any family wealth, certainly not anything that would involve a mansion. His parents were simple people, modest in their living, and their passing had left him with little more than an empty apartment and bills piling up. How could he have inherited a mansion he never knew existed? He read the letter again, trying to make sense of it. The estate was located in a secluded town, miles away from the city he called home. The letter spoke cryptically of an ancestor who had left behind the mansion, with no explanation of why it was hidden or why Nathan had been chosen as its heir. It was all so mysterious, almost too convenient. The words "family heirloom" jumped out at him, ringing in his mind like a warning bell. He had no choice but to go. There was something about it, a strange pull in his gut, urging him to see this through. It might be his ticket to escape the financial ruin he'd been living under, the very thing that had dragged him down since his parents' death. But the more he thought about it, the more questions he had. Why him? Why now? The decision wasn't easy. Nathan was skeptical, of course. He could have just tossed the letter aside, written it off as a prank or some sort of scam. But a part of him, the part that still held on to hope for something better, couldn't ignore the possibilities. He needed something to go right for once in his life, and the prospect of inheriting an estate, something grand and real, pulled at him in a way that felt both thrilling and dangerous. As he packed a small suitcase, his mind raced with the what-ifs. What kind of mansion could his parents have hidden from him? They weren't wealthy by any stretch of the imagination. They were modest, hard-working people who lived paycheck to paycheck, who never once mentioned a family inheritance. If the mansion was really part of the Hawke legacy, why hadn't they ever spoken of it? Was there something more to the story? The uncertainty gnawed at him, but the chance to leave his crumbling apartment behind and escape the pressure of constant financial struggle outweighed the fear of what he might uncover. The flight to the town was long and uneventful, the kind of journey where time seems to stretch in every direction, yet you never quite feel like you've moved forward. The town, once he arrived, was nothing like he expected. It sat on the edge of a forest, isolated from the bustle of modern life. The road leading to it was winding, covered in leaves and thick with the scent of damp earth. Nathan was struck by how eerie it felt, how out of place he felt as he drove through the narrow streets, past houses that looked like they hadn't been touched in decades. Then, just as the letter had described, there it stood, the mansion. Nestled among the trees at the top of a hill, it was as imposing as it was beautiful. Nathan's breath caught in his throat as he gazed at it. It looked like something out of an old Victorian novel, an intricate blend of Gothic architecture with towering spires, stone walls covered in ivy, and windows that seemed to glimmer with secrets. The structure felt both ancient and alive, as though it had a pulse, a heartbeat, beating in sync with the world's forgotten histories. It was everything the letter had promised, and far more. But even as Nathan marveled at the mansion's grandeur, an odd sensation washed over him, a feeling of unease that settled in his chest. Something about the place felt wrong, as if it had been waiting for him, but not in a welcoming way. It was as though the mansion was a living entity, aware of his presence, watching him. The long driveway leading to the front door was lined with tall, gnarled trees whose branches seemed to reach toward him as if to block his way. He parked in front of the mansion and hesitated for a moment, glancing up at the dark windows. No one else seemed to be around, and there was an unsettling silence in the air, as if the world itself was holding its breath. Taking a deep breath, he stepped out of the car and made his way to the front door. The mansion loomed above him, the weight of its presence heavy in the air. The door creaked open with an unsettling sound, and Nathan stepped inside. As the door shut behind him, the vast emptiness of the mansion seemed to swallow him whole. Dust floated in the dim light filtering through the windows, and the scent of aged wood and forgotten history filled the air. The silence was so complete that Nathan's own footsteps seemed loud in comparison, echoing off the stone floors. He glanced around the entrance hall, taking in the sight of ornate furniture, old portraits hanging crookedly on the walls, and a grand staircase that led up to the second floor. Everything about the place felt frozen in time, stuck in an era that no longer existed. And then, without warning, Nathan heard a sound, soft, almost imperceptible but definitely there. It came from the floor above. He froze, his heart racing. The house was large, empty, or at least it seemed to be. There was no way anyone could be up there. But that noise, it couldn't have been his imagination. As Nathan hesitated, wondering whether he should investigate or turn back, a sudden chill swept through the air. The mansion had just become far more than he bargained for. Nathan's fingers hovered over the doorknob, his mind racing. He could still hear the faint sound coming from upstairs, a soft rustling, almost like someone moving around in a room as if waiting for him. The mansion, with its cold stone walls and ancient wood floors, seemed to breathe around him. The hairs on his neck stood on end, the eerie silence almost suffocating. It was as if the house itself was alive, watching him, listening to him. He pushed the door open, his footsteps muffled by the thick carpet that lined the entryway. The house was massive, its high ceilings and long hallways stretching out before him. Everything inside seemed frozen in time. Dust clung to the old furniture, the curtains hung like faded memories, and the air was thick with the scent of age. It felt as if no one had set foot here in years, maybe decades, and yet something about it seemed too well maintained, too carefully preserved for a place so forgotten. "Hello?" Nathan called out, his voice echoing unervingly in the empty space. The silence answered him with a heavy stillness, broken only by the faint creak of the house settling. His mind raced with possibilities. Was this some elaborate prank? Had someone staged the entire scene to mess with him? Or was he really inheriting something that he didn't understand, something beyond the ordinary? He couldn't shake the feeling that he was in over his head. He tried to push the unease down and forced himself to move forward. The grand staircase ahead of him was both magnificent and imposing, its polished banister gleaming in the soft light filtering through the dusty windows. He couldn't help but wonder how much wealth it had taken to maintain such a place, and why his parents had never mentioned it. Nathan's heart pounded in his chest as he made his way to the stairs, his boots tapping softly against the floor. The house was so quiet, so still, that even his own breath felt too loud in the air. He took one step, then another, until he reached the top of the staircase. From here, the house seemed even more labyrinthine. Long hallways stretched in multiple directions, some leading to closed doors, others to the unknown. But it was the noise again that caught his attention. A soft rustle from the end of the hallway to his left, almost like something, or someone, was moving. His curiosity tugged at him, stronger now than the unease that had threatened to overwhelm him moments before. There was no turning back. He was already here, and whatever waited ahead, whether answers or something more unsettling, he would face it. He turned left, his steps echoing as he walked down the narrow corridor. The hallway was dim, lit only by a few flickering sconces on the walls. The air grew colder the further he went, the scent of old wood mingling with something else, something sharp and metallic. Nathan shivered involuntarily but kept walking. At the end of the hallway, a door stood slightly ajar, its wood dark and worn with age. The faint sound that had caught his attention earlier grew louder as he approached. It wasn't a whisper but more like the sound of something, or someone, moving restlessly. His heart thudded in his chest as he reached for the door, pausing for a moment to steady himself. With a deep breath, he pushed it open. The room was small, almost claustrophobic. Old furniture was scattered around, an armchair by the window, a wooden desk covered in papers, and a bed that looked as though it hadn't been used in years. Dust covered every surface, the air thick with a stale, musty smell. But it wasn't the room itself that made Nathan's breath catch in his throat. It was the figure standing in the corner near the far window. A young woman. She was motionless, her back to him, staring out the window into the sprawling forest beyond the mansion's grounds. Her hair, long and dark, cascaded down her back, and she was dressed in an old-fashioned gown, the kind that looked out of place as though she belonged to another time. There was something ethereal about her, almost as if she were a ghost, a figure trapped between worlds. Nathan opened his mouth to speak, but the words stuck in his throat. He wasn't sure if she was real or if his mind was playing tricks on him. This house, this mansion, had already begun to feel like a dream, an unsettling one that kept getting stranger the deeper he went. "Excuse me?" Nathan's voice finally broke the silence, barely above a whisper. The woman didn't move, didn't react. It was as if she hadn't heard him at all. "Hello?" Nathan tried again, this time more forcefully, his voice trembling with a mix of disbelief and fear. "Who are you?" Still she didn't respond. His pulse quickened. The tension in the room was unbearable, the silence hanging thick like a suffocating blanket. It was as if the air had stopped moving altogether, frozen in time. He wasn't sure how much longer he could stand there, his body rooted to the spot by a strange, inexplicable force. Suddenly the woman turned around. Her eyes were wide, a piercing blue that seemed to cut through the dim light of the room. She was beautiful in an unsettling way, her features delicate but haunting, as though she didn't quite belong in this world. And then without a word she spoke. "You shouldn't have come here." Her voice was soft, almost melodic, but it carried an edge, a warning. Nathan felt a chill run down his spine. "What do you mean?" he asked, though he already feared the answer. The woman's gaze shifted to the floor as if gathering her thoughts. When she looked up again, her expression was filled with something akin to sorrow, and something darker, something ancient. "I'm the one who was left behind," she said, her words slow and deliberate, as if each one had to be carefully chosen. "The mansion, it's more than just a house. It's a prison. And now that you're here, you've become a part of it." Nathan's mind reeled. His heart hammered in his chest. The mansion, a prison? Before he could ask anything more, the woman took a step toward him. There was something in her eyes, something almost pleading. But before he could speak, a sudden crash sounded from the floor above, followed by a guttural noise that seemed to reverberate through the walls. Nathan's stomach turned. Something was terribly wrong. And then, as if the world itself had decided to twist into something nightmarish, the woman's expression hardened, her face turning cold and distant. "Now you'll see." Nathan's heart raced, the blood pounding in his ears as the room seemed to close in around him. He could still hear the crashing sound from upstairs, reverberating through the walls like thunder, and now the woman's cold gaze bore into him, her words lingering in the air like a warning too late to heed. "Now you'll see." The silence that followed was suffocating, almost too thick to breathe in. He tried to process what she had just said, but his thoughts scrambled, tangled in a web of confusion and fear. A prison? He had inherited this mansion, not a haunted cell. What kind of madness was unfolding here? With a trembling hand, Nathan reached for the doorframe, his fingers clutching it for stability as the weight of the moment threatened to crush him. He glanced at the woman, who now stood perfectly still, her eyes locked on him as though watching for his next move. For a brief moment he thought about turning and running, escaping the mansion's grasp. But something in her presence held him there, as if the house itself had already claimed him, and his only choice now was to follow where it led. "Who are you?" Nathan whispered, his voice barely audible. The woman didn't answer at first, her lips pressing together in a thin line. Instead, she stepped closer, her movements slow and deliberate, like a predator circling its prey. There was a weight to her steps, an ancient grace that sent a ripple of unease through his chest. "My name is Leah," she finally said, her voice soft yet filled with an undeniable sorrow. And I have been waiting for someone like you. Nathan felt a chill seep into his bones. Waiting for him? He hadn't even known this place existed until a few days ago, let alone the woman standing in front of him. Her presence seemed to defy logic, like a ghost trapped in time, caught between the past and the present. Waiting for me? He repeated, his mind struggling to catch up with the bizarre reality unfolding around him. Yes, she answered, her eyes flicking toward the closed door at the far side of the room, the one he hadn't noticed before. There are things in this house you don't understand. Things you were never meant to find out. Before Nathan could respond, the ground beneath his feet trembled, a low, ominous rumble echoing through the walls. His gaze snapped to the door Leah had pointed to, and for a moment he thought he saw shadows shifting behind it, distant shapes that flickered like half-formed memories. The rumbling grew louder, more intense, as if something deep within the mansion was awakening. The woman's expression tightened, her earlier calm replaced by something darker, more urgent. "We have to go," she said suddenly, her voice sharp with panic. Nathan didn't ask why. His instincts, sharper now than they had ever been, screamed at him to follow her. He didn't know what was coming, but he knew that whatever it was, it would be worse if they stayed. As they moved toward the door, the rumbling intensified, shaking the foundation beneath their feet. The walls creaked and groaned as if the entire house was alive, fighting to keep them inside. Nathan could feel the air thickening, turning cold as the mansion seemed to exhale a long-held breath. Leah reached for the door, her fingers trembling slightly, and swung it open with one swift motion. Beyond it, the hallway stretched out, darker than before, the shadows seeming to stretch and writhe like living things. The flickering lights overhead cast strange patterns across the walls, distorting the space in a way that felt wrong, unnatural. "What's happening?" Nathan asked, his voice tight with fear. "The mansion is waking up," Leah replied, her tone grim. "You've triggered it. And now it's calling for something." As she stepped into the hallway, Nathan hesitated for just a moment, his gaze lingering on the room behind them. The weight of the place pressed down on him, its centuries-old secrets closing in. His stomach twisted with unease, but his legs obeyed the silent command to follow her. They moved down the hallway quickly, the sounds of the mansion's shifting walls echoing around them like a drumbeat. The air felt heavier with each step, thick with the sense of something imminent. Nathan felt like he was walking through a nightmare, unable to wake up, trapped in the suffocating reality of it all. As they reached the top of the stairs, Leah suddenly stopped, her body tensing. Her eyes narrowed, scanning the darkened space below. "What is it?" Nathan asked, his pulse quickening. "There's something downstairs," she said, her voice tight. "Something not human." Before Nathan could respond, a shadow detached itself from the darkness below, rising up the stairs in a slow, deliberate motion. It was tall, unnaturally so, and as it stepped into the dim light, Nathan felt his breath catch in his throat. Its skin was a pale, almost translucent white, and its eyes glowed faintly with an eerie blue light, unlike anything he had ever seen. Its form was too perfect, too smooth, its features almost faceless, as though it were an apparition, an entity not bound by the rules of the physical world. "What is that?" Nathan's voice was barely a whisper, his body frozen in place. "It's one of them," Leah answered, her voice a low growl. "The ones who were left behind when the house was built." The creature took another step forward, and Nathan felt the temperature in the hallway drop. His breath came out in visible clouds, the air growing colder with each passing second. Leah moved to stand in front of him, her body tense, her eyes narrowing. "You have to run," she said urgently. "Now." But before they could move, the creature spoke, its voice a haunting, unnatural tone. "You cannot leave," it said. "Not until the price is paid." Nathan's skin prickled as the words echoed through the hallway. He didn't understand what was happening, but it was clear that whatever this place held, whatever secrets it guarded, were far beyond anything he could ever have imagined. The mansion, the woman, and the strange creature were all part of something far more sinister than an inheritance gone wrong. "What price?" Nathan demanded, his voice shaking with a mix of anger and fear. The creature's lips curled into a grotesque smile, its eyes glowing brighter. "The price of your soul," it whispered. Nathan's heart hammered in his chest, the words hanging in the air like a deadly omen. The creature's voice still echoed in his mind, reverberating through the cold, oppressive silence that had descended upon them. "The price of your soul." He could feel the walls of the mansion closing in on him, the ancient stones seemingly alive, breathing in the very air around them. The shadows stretched and twisted, taking on unnatural shapes that danced in the corners of his vision. The creature's glowing eyes fixed on him with an unblinking intensity, and for the first time, Nathan realized just how insignificant he was in this terrifying place. Leah didn't move. She stood frozen, her face pale as though she had seen this before. Whatever had brought them to this moment, whatever this creature was, it was clear that she had no intention of fighting it. She wasn't trying to protect him. What do you want from me?" Nathan stammered, trying to find some semblance of courage. The creature tilted its head, its movements unnaturally smooth, like liquid flowing through a frozen landscape. There was something eerily familiar about the way it moved, too controlled, too perfect. It wasn't just alien. It felt like a reflection of the house itself, old, forgotten, and far beyond the realms of reality Nathan had ever known. The creature's lips parted once more, its voice cold as ice. "You are the inheritor. And this house is mine. It has been mine for centuries. You will not leave until the debt is paid." Nathan felt a sudden chill run through him, one that had nothing to do with the temperature of the room. There was something ancient in the creature's words, something that sent a wave of panic crashing over him. Leah, still standing motionless, finally spoke. Her voice trembled, though she tried to mask it with a calm demeanor. "We cannot leave. Not until the house is satisfied." "Why?" Nathan demanded, his voice growing more frantic. "Why me? Why this place?" Leah's gaze dropped to the floor, her fists clenching at her sides. "The mansion chose you. It always does. You were meant to inherit its burden." Nathan's confusion only deepened, but there was no time to ask more. The air around them thickened, as if the mansion itself was holding its breath. The creature advanced another step, its presence more imposing now, its eyes burning with that eerie blue glow. Nathan could feel an invisible pressure building, tightening around his chest, his throat. It was like the house itself was trying to swallow him whole. "What do you mean it chose me?" Nathan's voice cracked with desperation, his eyes darting between the creature and Leah. He wanted to run, but the weight of the atmosphere kept him rooted in place, as if the very ground was holding him captive. "It knows when a soul is ready to take on the burden," Leah murmured, her voice barely audible. "The mansion is not just a building. It is a prison for things that should never have existed. For centuries, it has waited for a new master to unlock its door." The creature took another step forward, and Nathan's pulse raced. His breath quickened as the cold pressed against his skin, tightening, suffocating. He could feel the creature's eyes on him like a weight pressing down, probing him, searching him. He couldn't move. He couldn't think. "You have to stop this," Nathan whispered, trying to rally what little courage he had left. "There must be another way." Leah shook her head slowly, her expression one of defeat. "There isn't. You can't escape what's already been set in motion." The creature reached out, its long, pale fingers brushing against Nathan's shoulder with a coldness that sent a shock of ice through his spine. He flinched at the touch, but its grip remained firm, unyielding. A voice, soft but distinct, slipped into his mind, and he staggered back, gritting his teeth as the words pressed against his consciousness. "You are the heir. You must make the choice." Nathan's vision blurred for a moment, the room spinning around him. The walls, the ceiling, even the floor seemed to warp and stretch like rubber, as if the very fabric of reality was being torn apart by some invisible force. He grasped at his head, trying to hold on to some shred of clarity. What do you mean? What choice?" His voice trembled, desperate, but the creature didn't answer. It merely stood there, its glowing eyes piercing through him like two burning coals. Leah stepped forward then, her voice barely above a whisper. "You can either stay and take control of the mansion, the power it offers. Or," she trailed off, her face clouded with regret. Or you can leave, but the house won't allow it. You will never leave alive. Nathan's mind reeled. The mansion was a prison, but it offered something more. Power? Control? Was that what he was supposed to inherit? The weight of the decision pressed down on him, heavier than the walls surrounding him. Choose. The creature's voice was a low, guttural growl, and Nathan felt an overwhelming pressure flood his body, as though the house itself was urging him to make a choice. Leah, Nathan rasped, his voice breaking. What do I do? What happens if I make the wrong choice? Leah's eyes were filled with an unspoken sorrow. If you choose wrong, you will become just another soul trapped here. Another prisoner of this place, feeding the mansion's hunger. The walls seemed to close in further, and Nathan could feel the suffocating grip of the mansion tightening. He glanced from Leah to the creature and back again, his mind racing. What was the right choice? How could he even know what was real anymore? And then a thought, an instinct, flashed through him like lightning. What if the mansion didn't just want him to choose? What if the mansion was playing him, manipulating him into making the wrong choice? He could feel the weight of the decision crashing down upon him, as if time itself was bending to the mansion's will, forcing him into a corner with no way out. His pulse was a drumbeat in his ears, and his mind swirled with doubt, fear, and a desperate need for escape. But the mansion wouldn't let him go. Not unless he made the choice. The tension in the air grew unbearable, and Nathan knew that time was running out. Nathan's heart raced, his every breath a struggle against the suffocating grip of the mansion. The creature's eyes, burning with an otherworldly intensity, bore into him, its presence an unrelenting force, pushing him closer to the brink of madness. The mansion itself seemed to pulse with a life of its own, its walls alive, shifting with the weight of centuries of darkness. A sudden sharp pain gripped his chest, like the very air was trying to tear him apart. The weight of the choice, the magnitude of what he was about to decide, threatened to crush him. His mind flashed with visions, twisted images of futures untold, of paths that splintered off into infinite possibilities. He saw himself trapped in the mansion, forever bound to its cursed halls. He saw power beyond comprehension, an empire of shadows, but with the cost of his soul. Time was running out. The creature loomed before him, its form now even more monstrous, its long clawed fingers twitching in anticipation. Every fiber of Nathan's being screamed for him to run, to flee, to escape the suffocating grasp of the mansion's power. But where could he go? The doors were locked, the windows sealed shut. The house itself was a trap, an inescapable labyrinth. You have seconds to decide, the creature hissed, its voice low and cold. The choice is yours and time waits for no one. Nathan's pulse hammered in his ears, each beat a reminder that his fate hung by a thread. His fingers trembled as they gripped the cold stone of the wall behind him, grounding himself in the chaos. But I don't know what to choose. His voice cracked under the pressure, desperation flooding every syllable. How do I know what's real? What if I make the wrong decision? Leah's voice cut through the storm of his thoughts, a whisper laced with sorrow and fear. There is no wrong choice, Nathan. There is only the path you choose to walk. But you must choose now. The mansion will not wait forever. The pressure in the room mounted, an invisible force pushing down on him, suffocating him with the weight of destiny. The creature stepped closer, its eyes glowing brighter, its form looming larger, stretching beyond the boundaries of the room. Nathan could feel it, the pull of its power, the promise of ultimate control. The mansion whispered its temptations to him, a seductive call that echoed in his mind, coaxing him toward the darkness. But then a sudden surge of clarity hit him like a thunderclap. It was as if the storm in his mind had broken and he saw it, the truth, hidden beneath the layers of fear and doubt. The mansion wasn't just a prison, it was a reflection of himself. The darkness it offered wasn't external, it was internal. The choice wasn't about power, control, or escape. It was about facing himself. He could take the power, dominate the mansion, and claim its throne, but at what cost? His soul, his humanity, would wither away, consumed by the very thing that had trapped him in the first place. He would be no different than the countless souls that had come before him, their bodies mere husks, their memories faded. Or he could break the cycle. He could choose to defy the mansion, to tear down the walls that held him captive, and to set himself free. But that path would be dangerous, filled with uncertainty, and it would come at a price. He looked at Leah, her eyes filled with silent understanding, and then at the creature, whose form seemed to pulse and shift, like it was part of the very mansion itself. He could feel its hunger, its need for submission. But he also felt something else, a flicker of defiance, a spark of hope. The creature snarled, its patience wearing thin. "Time is almost up, Nathan. The decision must be made. You will either take the power, or be consumed by it." Nathan's pulse quickened as the creature's voice surged within his mind, the weight of its presence threatening to overwhelm him. But he couldn't give in. Not now. Not after everything he had learned, everything he had fought to understand. He stepped forward, his legs shaky but determined. He wasn't going to take the power. He wasn't going to let the mansion claim him. "I choose freedom," Nathan said, his voice steady, though his insides churned with fear. "I choose to leave this place, to destroy it, to end the cycle." The creature's eyes flashed with fury, and the ground beneath Nathan's feet began to tremble. The mansion roared, its walls groaning as though it were alive, fighting against his defiance. The air crackled with energy, the tension so thick it felt like it might shatter at any moment. "You cannot escape," the creature hissed, its voice a terrifying growl. "You are bound to this place." The floor beneath Nathan's feet cracked, and he stumbled back, barely managing to catch his balance. The air was thick with the stench of burning stone, and the mansion seemed to distort around him, its walls closing in. He could feel the creature's power, its anger reaching for him, trying to crush him with its weight. But Nathan didn't falter. He clenched his fists, drawing on every ounce of willpower he had left. He wasn't going to give in. He wasn't going to become another soul trapped in this nightmare. "Leah," he shouted, his voice cutting through the chaos. "Help me." Leah moved forward, her eyes filled with an emotion Nathan couldn't quite place. She stepped into the center of the room, and for a moment the mansion seemed to pause. The tension in the air lightened, the oppressive weight lifting, as if the very presence of her had caused the mansion to hesitate. "We can destroy it," Leah said, her voice firm, steady. "Together." Nathan didn't hesitate. He grabbed her hand, and the two of them stood side by side, facing the creature and the house that had held them captive for so long. The creature hissed, its form growing more monstrous, more unstable. It wasn't just the mansion that was dying, it was the creature as well. Its power, its very existence was tied to the house, and without it, it would cease to be. The ground cracked again, but this time, it wasn't the mansion's rage that fueled the destruction. It was their combined resolve. The walls trembled, shaking violently as if they, too, were beginning to crumble under the weight of their defiance. Nathan and Leah stepped forward together, their hands clasped, the energy between them crackling with power. And as they stood there, a final surge of force erupted, tearing through the mansion and the creature. The mansion screamed in agony, its walls splintering, its foundation shattering. The creature let out a howl, its form disintegrating into nothingness as the house collapsed around them. The world spun, the chaos around them too much to comprehend. But as the dust settled and the air grew still, Nathan realized something. They had won. The mansion was gone. And with it, the darkness that had threatened to consume him. Nathan stood amidst the ruins of the mansion, the broken walls and shattered windows reflecting the pale light of dawn. The air felt different now, lighter, as though the very atmosphere had been cleansed of the heavy darkness that had once clung to it. His breath came slowly, steadily, as if the weight of what had just happened had only begun to sink in. The mansion was gone, reduced to nothing but rubble and dust, and with it, the creature's oppressive presence had vanished. But what was left? What had they truly won? For a moment, Nathan felt adrift, as though the world had shifted beneath him, leaving him standing on unstable ground. The mansion had been more than just a place. It had been a mirror of his fears, his desires, and his darkest thoughts. It had offered him everything he'd ever wanted, and yet, it had nearly destroyed him. And now, without it, he felt as though a part of him was missing, a void where the mansion's shadow had once loomed. But then he looked beside him at Leah, standing tall and strong despite the toll everything had taken on them both. She had been his anchor, his guide through the chaos, and together they had found the strength to break free. "You did it," Leah said quietly, her voice a soft reassurance in the stillness of the morning. "You chose the right path." Nathan didn't answer immediately. He couldn't, not yet. The weight of everything was still heavy on his mind. The mansion had been more than just a cursed house. It had been a test, one that had forced him to confront his own darkness, his own flaws. But the truth was he hadn't faced those things alone. Leah had been with him, a constant presence in the storm, reminding him of what truly mattered. The mansion was gone, but its lesson remained. "I don't know what to do now," Nathan said finally, his voice raw with the honesty of his uncertainty. "What comes next?" Leah smiled, her eyes thoughtful. "What comes next is up to you. You've learned what the mansion was trying to teach you. Now you get to decide what kind of life you want to build." For the first time since he had arrived at the mansion, Nathan felt a spark of hope. It wasn't the kind of hope that came from grand victories or dramatic escapes. It was quieter, more personal, a hope that came from the realization that he had the power to choose his own future. "I've spent so long running away from things," Nathan said, looking out at the horizon where the first rays of the sun were breaking through the clouds. "I didn't even know what I was running toward. But now I think I understand." Leah nodded, stepping beside him and placing a hand on his shoulder. "The mansion was always about choices, Nathan. It was never about the power or the temptation. It was about who you would become in the face of it all. And now you're free to choose again." The world around them seemed to breathe with a new kind of energy, as if the very landscape was waking up along with them. The sky was clear, the air crisp, and there was a sense of quiet serenity settling over everything. It was as though the dawn itself was a symbol of the new beginning that lay ahead for them both. Nathan took a deep breath, the scent of fresh earth filling his lungs. It was grounding, calming, and for the first time in what felt like forever, he felt at peace. "I think it's time to go home," he said finally, his voice steady and calm, a sense of finality in his words. "Home?" Leah raised an eyebrow, a small smile tugging at the corner of her lips. "Yes," Nathan replied, turning to face her fully. "Home. Where I belong." The journey had taken them far, beyond the physical walls of the mansion, and deep into the recesses of their own hearts. But now Nathan knew that the true meaning of home was not a place. It was a feeling, an understanding of self that he had finally found. It was in the choices he had made, in the strength he had discovered within himself, and in the people he had come to care for. The mansion had been a test, a dark reflection of what he feared and desired most, but it had also been a catalyst for his transformation. The creature that had tried to lure him in with promises of power and control no longer held any sway over him. The mansion had tried to make him doubt himself, to believe that he was nothing without it. But now Nathan knew better. "I don't need the mansion," he whispered, more to himself than to Leah. "I never did." Leah's expression softened, and she gave him a reassuring nod. "You never did." Together they began walking away from the ruins, the remnants of the mansion fading into the distance behind them. It was a strange feeling, walking away from something that had been such a significant part of his life for so long. But there was no longing, no desire to turn back. The mansion had played its role, and now it was time to move forward. The world ahead of them was wide and open, filled with possibilities that Nathan had never truly considered before. There was still so much to discover, so much to learn. The road ahead wouldn't always be easy, and there would be challenges along the way. But now Nathan felt ready. He was no longer running from anything. He was choosing his path, step by step, with confidence and clarity. Leah walked beside him, her presence a comforting constant, a reminder that he wasn't alone. They had faced the darkness together and emerged stronger, and now they would face whatever came next together too. As they reached the edge of the land where the mansion once stood, Nathan took one last look at the place that had shaped him, the place that had tried to break him. And in that moment he felt nothing but gratitude. For the mansion had been the catalyst for his rebirth, a rebirth that had begun with a choice to face the darkness and rise above it. And now the real journey could begin. "We'll make it," Nathan said quietly, looking at Liao with a newfound sense of purpose. "We already have," Liao replied, a soft smile gracing her lips. The future stretched out before them, vast and unknown, but for the first time in a long time, Nathan felt ready for whatever came next.